Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Lawson, how are you, my friend?
What's up, boy?
We're talking about Proverbs 16, and we're on episode, I've lost track, 6 or 7. And today we're going to talk about a few verses. Do you mind, Lawson, if I start off by just reading those verses?
I think you should.
Good thing, because I was going to do it no matter what you said. Proverbs 16, verse 8 says, "Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice." Verse 11 says, "A just balance and scales are the Lord's, all the weights in the bag are his work." Verse 17, "The highway of the upright turns aside from evil. Whoever guards his way preserves his life." And verse 19 says, "It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud." And normally, I wouldn't want to go through a chapter of the Bible and be pulling out, verses like 8, 11, 17, 19. It could feel kind of random. But because Proverbs is a book of just that, sayings that are kind of pithy and proverbial, and they're bits of wisdom, often not connected in a storylines per se, I think it's safe to look at these 4 verses in light of a key word, and the word is integrity. The word integrity. When I say the word integrity, Lawson, what comes to mind?
Integrity to me means that you are in alignment. The way you think and act, behave, are in alignment with your beliefs and what you say. You're not off track, I guess. What you are portraying is genuine, authentic, and it aligns with what's in your heart and what's in, what you talk about believing in, and what you set out to do, what you describe you're going to do or behave or think. I don't know about think maybe necessarily, but it would help. I think it's in there somewhere maybe.
Yeah, man, I think that's a great working definition for our time together today as we look through Proverbs 16, handful of verses. Let's start with verse 8. "Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice." And I'll make the case to you for why I think these 4 verses kind of fit on the topic of integrity, and why we could kind of pull a thread through them where the thread says integrity, and they're all kind of connected.
Okay, so but the first one here is you're not choices, but the two that are opposing one another is a little with righteousness, or a lot with injustice.
Right. Better is a little with righteousness. And I would say there's some relationship, even though they're not probably synonymous. There's a relationship between integrity and righteousness. Now, the integrity purists out there will debate me, and for good reason, because, you could say like a really evil person could have super high integrity, right? Because they said they're going to do evil. They have a heart full of evil, and it's the Grinch, right? From the Christmas movie. He said he was going to go wreck Christmas, and down the hill he came to wreck Christmas.
It's what he believed in, like gangs or something like that.
Sure,
they have a code they live by.
Famous people throughout history. It's Attila the Hun or whoever. And you think, you could argue Attila the Hun had big time integrity. But I think what we want to do for our purposes is, since our podcast is focused on being godly fathers who train our children in ways that are godly, we don't want to reward what I would call the educational integrity or the academic integrity, where you go, "Hey, son, as long as you say I'm going to hate my brother, then you're going to get big integrity points around here for hating your brother." Way to be in alignment, right? We're not going to do that. So therefore, I think topics like righteousness or justice belong in our working definition of integrity on this podcast. And if you disagree with me, then go find another podcast. Lawson doesn't care. Just go find another podcast. Verse 11, "A just balance and scales are the Lord's." Did you want to interrupt? Go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, like you always do. Just go right ahead. Just interrupt me.
Yep. I'm going to correct you a little bit.
Again. I can hear my wife cheering now. She's on her elliptical at the YMCA going, yeah, Lawson, get him.
You've had 5 cups of coffee. I can tell it. Slow it down a little bit because it sounds like you're saying adjust balance. Like you need to adjust your balance.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. Now let's do it again. Verse 11. This next segment of the Father on Purpose podcast brought to you by a much calmer and gentler version of Kent Evans. The letter A, and then the word just, balance. And that's actually a great point because, let me read the verse and come back. A just balance and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. We've talked a little bit about this in the Proverbs 16 discussion we've had over the last several weeks. When people would go to the market in the Old Testament, one of the ways they would buy things, whether it was maybe linen, they may buy by the length, but a lot of things they would buy by the weight. They might buy a pound of coffee or a pound of spice or a pound of oil. And the merchant had a scale, and you'd come up and you'd grab as much. It's kind of like going to the the produce section of your grocery. You get a couple apples, you throw them in the scale, they weigh X, you take them up and you pay by the weight. Well, that was pretty true in the Old Testament. And so what unscrupulous vendors or even unscrupulous buyers would do is they would have a bag of weights that weren't exactly accurate. The buyer might have a weight that says 2 pounds, but in reality, it may be heavier or lighter based on what game he was trying to play. And the same might be for a vendor. And so what this verse is telling us is a just balance or a scale that is in perfect alignment, that is not at all tilted or gamed. All the weights in the bag are his work. So an honest vendor or an honest buyer. I remember working with a guy, his name was Don, and Don was, you could call him a master negotiator. He was a really good negotiator. But what he really was a really good liar. He was very good at, he'd have 3 vendors and he'd go, Lawson, I'm giving you first dibs on this. Okay. You're going to get first dibs. And you just need to know if your price between you and me is completely confidential. So what's your best price? And you'd tell him $1. And then he'd call the next vendor and go, hey, Tommy, I'm going to give you first dibs on this, Tommy. Your price is going to need to be better than $1, but where are you going to go? And Tommy would say 98 cents. Then he'd call Billy. Hey, Billy, listen, I'm going to give you first dibs on this. And on he would go, right? And then he'd come back and be so proud that he got it down to 93 cents when he just lied to 3 people to get there. I even saw at a point where he told a story one day in the office, true story, about his own son, who at the time was 12 or 13, and they went to a movie, and his son convinced the movie person he was 10 so he could get the cheaper ticket for the child. And Don was so proud of him. No joke. He was like, I was so proud of my boy. And I thought, oh my goodness, for real? And so that's what verse 11 is talking about. And verse 17 says, the highway of the upright turns aside from evil. Whoever guards his way preserves his life. We've all bumped into those rumble strips on the highway, and not just while we're falling asleep at the wheel, but we've all gone and we're on the rumble strips. And that's what I see in verse 17 is the highway of the upright. It could be said that someone driving straight down the road, never swerving, is driving with great integrity. Right? They're on the road. Now, again, that's if we're going the right direction. If you're on the road to, annihilating a whole generation of people, well, let's not call that integrity, even though, again, in an academic sense, it might be. And then finally, verse 19, and then I'm going to take a breath and let you just talk to me about some stories or some times when you've seen this play out, or ask the next question for us, Lawson. It's better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. Why would we want to include a verse about humility, which is what verse 19 is about, in this conversation about integrity? And partly because we're trying to put the definition, the box, the guardrails of our definition of integrity, it should be a biblical one. And so we're going to reward things in this conversation that where integrity looks like the godly character traits. And one of those godly character traits is humility. God says he gives grace to the humble, but resists the proud. So if we're going to be men, fathers who walk with integrity, we're going to be men who walk in righteousness, honesty, consistency, and humility. Those are some things. Now, that may not be the only things, but those are some words we could pull out of verses 8, 11, 17, and 19 to have this conversation about integrity. And it's stuff you probably talked to your wife and your daughters about over the last 20-something years. Lawson, tell me a story, or where would you like to take our conversation next?
Lawson, tell me a story. You know what I think about 19 is it doesn't say it's better to be poor and stop there. You know, it's not saying, it's comparing what is best. It's better to be with the lowly spirit, the humble, the people who need, than it is to divide riches and spoils with the proud. And you know, I would go on to say, like, it makes me think like of things that you get without doing good, you know, like I just don't see that as that verse is steering us toward it's okay to be lowly spirit. Doesn't mean, you know, depressed and just I kind of read it like that at first, you know, you read it multiple times. But I was also, what you said about that vendor made me think. I was with a team in Atlanta last week, and we were with a vendor who, I don't know, it was new, we were discovering one another, and this person was putting on a presentation about their company, trying to, you know, we're talking about getting a relationship going. And myself and the team of us that were there together, probably 10 or so of us, were on a group chat about travel and when's everybody getting in, you know, the little things like that.
Sure.
But God, this person just talked about our competition openly in this room within their place, and what they don't do well, and what they you know, how they go to market and all this. And so in the group chat, I just said, hey, let's be careful, because whatever he's telling us about them, he's going to be telling them about us. And, you know, got a lot of thumbs ups, and it was because everybody was thinking the same thing. And so you can just feel when you're with someone who is representing something. And he was repeatedly saying, this is part of the point of the story. I skipped it. He had repeatedly said, you know, like, I'm not one of these people who bashes, you know, our competition, and so it just gave us all this. We left that meeting going, we'll probably bring that product line on, but it's not because of that person.
Sure.
Because you could tell he was out of alignment. Hunter brought something up before about integrity, and I want to use it if we can as an analogy, because I thought it was perfect, about structural integrity, you know, to help kind of put some tangible parameters around what we're talking about, like what you said, the bridge, or, you know, maybe even the engineers who built the bridge promise that the bridge is trustworthy to do what it was designed to do. It's built for something. It was designed in such a way, and its promise to us is that it's going to carry cars. It's going to carry cars and people and not fall. And so a couple of questions for you. I've wondered, do you find it difficult at times to walk with integrity? And then what are some ways that we can maybe help each other in that? And so back to the bridge, it's designed in a certain way. It's signed off on. It's going to do what it was designed to do. And I think in our lives, you know, God designed us in a certain way, and God has put us in positions of fatherhood to do his work. And Jesus has signed off on us. And so I think it's incumbent on us to, in our hearts, you know, do our very best to fulfill that, and to do what we've promised to do, what we're striving to promise over and over to do, which is be a father on purpose, and do that well. What are some ways that when you find it difficult, like before we jumped on to record, you mentioned about the bridge, like it also matters what foundation it's built upon.
Sure.
So that it can have structural integrity. Do you find it difficult ever in your life to keep the integrity going?
No, I have no trouble whatsoever.
There you go, April.
In fact, I'm having trouble understanding the question because it's so foreign from my experience. Absolutely. I'll give you a specific example. I had a boss who used to tell me, Kent, one of the things I love about you is that you are passionate. He goes, the problem is when you take passion and dial it all the way up, it looks just like anger. Mm. And so most people in the meeting don't know if you're just passionate or if you're mad at them. And so what I would say is, I'm just passionate. However, what was coming across is that I was angry with people in the room. Even when I wasn't. Now, half the time I was angry. Let's be honest. I wasn't just passion dialed too high up. Sometimes I was quite frankly just angry with people, and I had to kind of work on that and still have to work on that. I have to work on not being an angry jerk pretty much every week at least, and maybe every day. In fact, April and I were just talking yesterday or the day before, and she and I both said, we don't know how it happened exactly. Like, we don't know how we got where we are, but we feel like the last, month or two, we've just been way more punchy with our kids. And so we've been yelling more and like, it's time for bed. I said, go to bed. We've just been more tense. And like, if you could measure the tension in our home, like it's been bumping up a little bit. Like you think green, yellow, red, like on some kind of dial, we've been in like the yellow, for, a while. And we were just asking ourselves, and I've had a number of people pull me aside and go, hey man, like you had a point, but your point got lost because you were just a jerk in how you delivered it. And I take a little comfort in the verse in Romans chapter 7. I kind of knew it from memory a little, but I have to look it up to get it quoted right. But Paul says in Romans 7, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. And he goes on and he says, as it is, it's no longer myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that the good itself doesn't dwell in me. Then he goes on to say, I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. And then he goes on to say, it is sin living in me that causes me to make some of those choices. And that doesn't get me off the hook, but it is true because, yeah, man, I would say I probably have an integrity issue at least every week because I want to be a patient, loving, caring, kind, gentle dad. I want to be a patient, loving, kind, caring, gentle husband. I want to be a patient, loving, kind, all the fruits of the Spirit. I want to be that way, right? But I'm not always that way with Hunter. I'm not always that way with my wife. I'm not always that way with my kids. And so I probably live out of quote unquote disintegrity. Is that a word? I live out of a state of deviance from this straight and narrow plumb line pretty much all the time to some degree, right? I mean, to some degree.
What a great answer. I'm right here with you. Yeah.
I mean, it's true. Now, having said that, I don't get to just go, hey, I can be a jerk. You're going to have to learn to deal with it. Mm-hmm. No, over time, I remember hearing a pastor one time say, being a Christian doesn't mean you're sinless, but man, over time, maybe you could sin less.
That's awesome.
I love that phrase. And part of it, Lawson, comes back to the bridge example or the building, like Hunter mentioned before we started. The building makes a promise, right? The building makes a promise. It's a 10-story building. It goes up. And what is it promising? You can be safe in the building. You can be safe in the building. It's going to always be a 10-story building standing upright. Or the bridge makes a promise. Yeah, you can drive from this end of the state to the other state over the river because we built a bridge with structural integrity. The challenge is that promise is only as good as the foundation that thing is built on. Basically, that's why a lot of contracts have.
Yeah, they could build the very best bridge that's ever been built and put it on muddy foundation, sandy foundation, and it's not going to hold.
You work in a business where you guys do some fire prevention. Well, a building works great until you set it on fire, right? And then at which point, if you set the building on fire, all of a sudden structural integrity starts to get harmed. Or if the foundation shakes, if there's an earthquake, why do a lot of contracts have force majeure clauses in the contract, or an act of God in the contract? Because they're going, look, man, this deal is as good as right up until there's a hurricane. Right. Or right up until there's an earthquake. After that, we can't guarantee anything. And many of us dads have built our claims of integrity on the wrong foundations, right? Like my own self-will, or my own ability to be healthy, or my own ability to be financially stable, or my own ability to think and do my job. Well, all that can be taken from you. And so sometimes we have every intention of living with integrity, but the thing to which we've anchored our promises shifts and moves. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we find out, man, I'm no longer a very integrous individual. Hey, Lawson, have you ever wondered, how are you doing as a dad? Have you ever thought that?
All the time.
We know, we're dads, you and me. We know that is a constant challenge for dads, is how am I doing? So what we built was the Godly Father Quiz. It's a 28 question, totally free online tool. You can go and take the survey and figure out where are you now and where you want to go next. How does that sound, Lawson?
It sounds great. I've done it and it was very helpful. I love it.
Dad, right now, pull over, put down your Coca-Cola, get off of the internet. No, wait a minute. Go back to the internet. Go to manhoodjourney.org/quiz, Q-U-I-Z, manhoodjourney.org/quiz, and take the free, totally free Godly Father assessment today so you can know how you're doing as a dad and where you need to grow and improve.
You know what I thought of? It's funny that verse 17, the highway of the upright turns aside from evil. Whoever guards his way preserves his life. I want to weave in a point here about accountability and having some people in your life. Typically for me, it's been, other dudes that kind of, we do this thing together, because you can sometimes begin to get off course real slowly, just a degree off or 2 degrees off. And then before you know it, you turn around. I had a buddy that found himself in some real hot water financially. And it started with a slow, change in his habits. It was gambling, and it was just a little thing. And, before you knew it, he was in way over his head. He was in debt. He had some bad guys looking for him. And it was one of those things where he said, I did just wake up one morning and go, you know what? I think I'm going to ruin my life and get way, way, way out of balance, financially, and get some bad guys after me. I think that'd be pretty fun. It just started with this little slow trickle. And when I read The Highway, I remember one late night, Audrey and I were coming back. We were driving, I think, from Atlanta to back home to Kentucky at the time. Little kids in the back, they were asleep. It was late at night, and my eyes started getting droopy. I just had to pull over, get off the interstate, and stop. We went to a little gas station, got back in the car, went back to the interstate, and began to get on the interstate and drive south.
Oh,
an
the wrong
hour
direction?
in the wrong direction.
Oh, man.
It was dark. It was late. I drove a whole hour the wrong way off course, and didn't realize it until I was like, that sign, that street name looks familiar. And, so it can happen without noticing it, kind of unintentionally. And so it helps to have, in my case, it would have helped to pay better attention, look at the GPS, that sort of thing. But I've also had times where guys in my life, or many times with Audrey in my life, who says, "Is that what you meant to do? Is that what you just said you thought you did was not what just happened?" Do you see that? Do you see what just happened?
You mean your wife occasionally tells you you're getting off the track, like my wife does?
Yes.
Man.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so I guess my point is, if we are trying to be on the highway of the upright and turn aside from evil and guard our way, let's not feel like you're alone.
Yeah.
Number one, there are people in your life who would love to help. I hope that and pray that. And if not, we all have God's word, and I don't remember what it is, but somewhere in there it's you're better at this than me. It's about it's a saying about not written on tablets of stone, but written on human hearts. You know, so let's have his design for our structural integrity written on our heart. And that is where we go to, you know, that is what leads us versus trying to figure it out alone or on our own, you know, riding solo. These 4 verses, let's write them on our heart. And then when in our walk that we're trying to walk on the highway that right and, you know, live with integrity, these verses can be, you know, a strong reminder of why we're doing it and how.
You know, when you think of that stretch in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 7, when Jesus talked about the parable of the wise builder and the foolish builder, and the wise builder built his house on the rock, and the foolish builder built his house on the sand. And one of the things that Jesus said in that parable is, he says, and the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And then later it describes the house built on the sand, and it says, and the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house. And I think that's beautiful how the language is the exact same. It's not like, you know, the believer isn't going to have wind and rain and trouble. The guy who builds his house on the rock and the guy who builds his house on the sand are both going to have trouble, and challenges are going to come. But it says the second house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And that's one of the challenges for us as believers, right? Is I don't think most people have as big a problem with Jesus as they have with Jesus followers who claim to have this Christ-centered life, but then they are hateful and judgmental and accusatory and duplicitous and hypocritical. I think most of us dads don't have as much a problem with like inculcating our children with the correct doctrine as we do walking in integrity. I hear way more dads in our email inbox and in our surveys and in our events really wrestling with, how do I live this life in a way where my kids kind of, what they get is what they see, and what they see is what they get. And what I say I'm going to do is what I actually do. And at some level, I want to encourage dads to do that. Paul did say, hey, follow me as I follow Christ. Like Paul said, I want to be an example. Having said that, Paul also said, I don't always do what I want to do. And that's sin living in me. And so we've got to help our kids anchor their faith to something more sure than us. I don't want my kids to go, you know what? Right. I'm going to follow Jesus just as long as my dad stays my perfect hero.
Right.
Man, you talk about sand.
Right.
That's trouble for them. And I know a lot of dads feel like that's the pressure. They feel like that's the pressure of being a dad. I got to get this perfect or my kids are going to go off the rails. Well, okay. There's a balance there. There's a tension there of wanting to be an example versus wanting to be the hero. How have you managed that tension, Lawson, with you or even your wife, Audrey, with 2 daughters? How have you guys managed that tension of wanting to set a good example, but at the same time, not having your daughters think that, you know, you are the alpha and omega?
Yeah, I'll tell you a different story. It's not me. Got a buddy, Todd Simmer, and his son has now gone on to play at a really high level college football.
Todd Simmer?
Uh-huh.
That's a great last name. I bet he took a lot of heat for that in high school.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Sorry.
Todd, if you're out there listening.
Continue.
I'll get him. I'll get him for you.
Wait. I'll put that on the back burner. Continue.
So stupid. He has 2 boys, and the oldest at the time called a penalty on himself in a scrimmage game because he stepped out of bounds. after catching a pass. And
what?
Yeah, he went over, told the ref, and like his whole, the teammates, the coaches were just kind of up in arms about. It was a scrimmage game. It wasn't that big of a deal, but he walked over to the ref and said, who had been on, maybe too far to see or something, said I stepped out of bounds, so that's why I quit running. And so the ref pulled his flag out and threw the penalty. And Todd reinforced with his son how, look, integrity is not telling the truth. But in that case, it was about the alignment with their family values and how they had learned through kid Bible study and, going to the kid Bible groups and that sort of thing about God's watching and God trusts us and God wants us to do what would make his heart happy, that sort of conversation. And I don't know when it's too young to begin talking about it, but I think as soon as our kids can grasp that temptations come along, there's a difference between right and wrong. There are conversations that we can have with them that when we come upon a situation, we're preparing them so that when no one's around, they do what is what do you call it? Integrous.
I think that's a word.
Right. We're gonna say it is. In fact, while you catch up on this, I'm gonna look it up on Google.
Well, man, what a great story! Like this kid who was driven, and I don't think you can start too early. And just for the dad listening out there who has little bitty kids, dad, if your child is, I'll give you an example from my life over the last week.
Hang on, integrous, adjective, having or characterized by integrity. How about
we know so much here at Father on Purpose. We even know how to Google stuff. So take that, internet man. So even last week, I was with my 7-year-old Titus, and he had been hateful and irritating to his brother. And I asked him a question, probably amidst a lot of yelling, but I asked him a question. And I said, Titus, do you want to be a hateful brother? Like, is that what you want? Do you want to be like mean and have Timothy not like you or want to spend time with you? And what's his obvious answer? He's like, no. And I think accidentally, I wasn't trying to have like a lesson on integrity, but what I was showing him was, what do you want? Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Well, the actions from the last 15 minutes aren't that, aren't that, right? So I want to be a calm and kind. I want to have the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. I don't think there's a room full of people who you could assemble who've ever worked with me in the past who would just go, golly, that Ken Evans, picture of gentleness. I mean, boy, let me tell you, when I think of gentle, I don't think of anybody but Ken Evans. That's just, unfortunately, that wouldn't be the label that people would place on me right now. And I would love for it to be. I want to have the fruit of the Spirit, right? And so I need people in my life, like you mentioned a minute ago, who will challenge me and go, hey, man, it's one thing to be passionate. It's one thing to be aggressive, or one thing to be ambitious, but it's another thing just to be hateful or ugly. You've crossed a line. And I had somebody do that with me recently. I really valued it. It doesn't feel good. I'm not like excited. I don't want it to happen every Tuesday, but I am glad when it happens. It's the rumble strips of life, right? It's the rumble strips of life. And so even at a very, very young age, when we're asking our children, how do you want to be known? What do you want to have? I've asked my boys before, what kind of relationship do you want to have with your brothers when you're in your 20s and you no longer live under the same roof? What kind of relationship do you want to have? And when they start to list it, I go, well, do you think the current behavior is going to get you there?
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. I think that's a good conversation to have. Like, what's important to you? Let's take some time and reflect. Like, what kind of ball player do you want to be? What do you want to be known for among your friends? What's important to you? What do you think God's telling us? After that sermon, what'd you get, and how do you see that playing out in your life, and kind of cement that moment so that you can then circle back to it, when a moment comes around that is going to test that.
Well, Dad, we are in the middle of walking through Proverbs chapter 16, and we didn't mention it right at the top today, But part of the reason we're walking through this chapter is because it has a lot for dads to pull from it. I think evidenced by just these 4 verses we talked about today. Secondly, a lot of dads have told us they want to become better students of the Bible. I hope that today's conversation has helped you do that. And thirdly, we did it because Lawson said we had to. Like, he's just in charge around here, and he told me to do it. Just kidding. Do us a favor, Dad. If you found any value in today's episode, congratulations.
Yeah, please write to us.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
You probably had to look for it. Way to go. Come to our website, manhoodjourney.org/ guess what? Podcast / podcast. I know, shocker. We're so innovative. manhoodjourney.org / podcast. And here's what we want you to do. Click the button and talk to us. We have featured, 4 or 5 listeners on the show. We'd love to have your feedback. Give us an idea that you have used as a dad that has worked. Better yet, give us an idea you've used as a dad that hadn't worked so we can mock and ridicule you shamelessly. No, ask a question, share a big challenge, share a big win from your family. We would love to feature you on a future episode of the podcast. Head over to manhoodjourney.org / podcast and click the button and start talking to us today. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again next week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org / podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.